Hey, you. Yeah, you. Do you know what time it is? Did you check your calendar? Did you check your watch? Check. What time is it, Flame?
Today is TLF and we are back on the actual meta talk when we're gonna be looking at melees this time in
Did you miss us?
and how they seem to be performing. Now, as always, a disclaimer. This is not essentially the best and the worst. The worst that we're gonna have on today's tier list has done like a plus 24 or 23 and even 25 keys, so it's pretty high up there. So just take this with a grain of salt. It's just how they seem to be preferred by the top end players, because it's just interesting to see how they evolved across time. And we're gonna be looking at strictly from key level finishes in time, and I know some of you guys will disagree, and that's perfectly fine. You can let us down in the comment question how wrong we were, and you can give us your own tier list.
Yeah, well, but we love you. We love you still. Now the data is taken from Radar.io, if I'm not mistaken. They haven't looked at Warcraft logs this time because that's a big mess over there.
Warcraft logs is a little bit too all over the place.
Yeah. And we're basically having like objective data from this, and you know that's what it is. But listen, what's most important here is that you check out our Patreon, you know, the place where you can get some cool ass wallpapers for your main, you know, if you're in the right tier. You can check out bloopers, some funny shit that's going on behind the cameras, and also Patreon monthly chats and some streaming on Discord on how we edit shit, you know, pretty boring, but you know, some people are interested for it. All of that can be obtained while supporting this amazing work of art that we do on Marcelian&Online. So go check it out in the description, Patreon, you know, after you watch the video. And that being said, let's check out Arms Warrior,
as
baby.
Always, Arms Warrior, funny enough, it started as one of the top tier specs, definitely the warrior spec of choice, which has kind of fallen off a little bit. I know that I've been looking at the top warrior keys, and I can only see Fury at the time. It's probably not a very big difference between Arms and Fury, but Fury does seem to be clearing the higher end of keys as of this recording. That can obviously change. So right now I think Arms is around B tier?
It's on B tier, and I remember the first time we did the tier list, or you know, the last time we did the rankings for Mythic Plus, Arms was much higher. I think it was an A tier for sure. But that, you know, that doesn't mean like anything. This is just like the creme de la creme, the top of the highest of the peakest of the Everest mountains. So if you play Arms Warrior, you can definitely dominate. What Mike's key was this?
I don't remember. Was it like a 26 or maybe a 26? The thing is, overall, as like a very gross generalization, there's like about 1 key level difference between Arms and Fury, I think.
Yeah, you're gonna see like even the D tiers are clearly like 24. So this just goes to show everybody's Gucci on this. But okay, let's check out one of my favorites, I would say, for dungeons, Assassination Rogue. And I don't think much has changed for Assassination. I remember we ranked it based on logs back then on a B tier as well. It was still in pretty good, and I think it's gonna be also a B here with Arms Warrior. But here is the deal, right? Assassination isn't a joke in dungeons. It can deliver pretty good consistent AoE damage. Doesn't have AoE burst, but it's really consistent, and it can really shine once you go on that Zoldyck legendary, where you can have like the execute range for mobs, have your poisons and blades stick really fast. It's just that Subtlety is such a beast right now. It cannot, and Outlaw too, Outlaw Rose too, but because of Subtlety and Outlaw being so good, Assassination doesn't really see as much play, right?
Yeah, that's the thing, because that's probably what hurts Assassination the most, is that Sub and Outlaw are just doing a little bit better. And it's very likely that if the top Sub and Outlaw Rogues would play Assassination, they would probably be doing almost similar keys, I would expect, because as long as you're good at the spec, you're still going to be performing pretty well. Yeah,
so definitely a B tier for now, you know, big ass keys, but if you're Assassination main, you'll be fine on doing any types of keys whatsoever. Now the next one is Le Enhancement Shaman.
Man, okay, so we were speaking about unfortunate D tiers. The Enhancement Shaman is currently a little bit lower on the list. I don't think it's a specific surprise. Nothing essentially changed for enhancement for like ever. I don't know when the last patch note included anything for enhancement so far. It might have been 9.0 or 9.0.5 pretty late into the patch, but that was about it. Nothing in 9.1 for sure. It's still solid, it's still clearing like pretty high keys, way more than either of us are clearing anyway on more meta specs. But enhancement is unfortunately
it's a D tier. It's a D tier, and that once again, guys, this means that you can, if you play enhancement, you have the possibility and option and capability to do a +20. We're looking here at the worst key being a 23 or 24. So even if it's in D tier right now, it doesn't mean that it's so way worse than I don't know, a red paladin or a feral or whatever. Yeah. It's there and it can do just fine. Just like in terms of like the purest different minimal differences on all of these high-end plays, it's on a D tier for this list. But we love enhancement, and
a lot of people love enhancement. Too many people love enhancement, and Blizzard needs to get on it.
Yeah, we're hoping they're gonna change some. Now let's look at Feral Druid, a absolute beast of a spec. I love it. You should play it if you haven't done already. I've always said this about Feral Beast in single target. In AoE, and this hasn't really changed that much. We talked about it.
That's a little bit unfortunate, because obviously its counterpart is balance, and balance is just balance Druid has
no competition.
A crap ton of single target, which kind of comes over Feral's line of work, and that's a little bit of a shame. And Feral actually kind of dropped a little bit. It didn't necessarily drop. It's just every other spec is just clearing way better than Feral right now, and Feral is kind of in the lines of enhancement. I don't know if it might be a smidge better than enhancement, but I think it's still a little bit away from C tier, and the specs that will eventually be in C tier as well.
Yeah, it doesn't. It definitely doesn't have the I wouldn't say all damage profile capabilities of a Boomkin. So if you have a Druid in your team, he's probably going to play Boomkin for clearing those super high keys, not a Feral. It just goes to show. Sad to see, however, that in terms of like how it used to be, and it used to be a B tier, but as things evolved and we're looking at all of the numbers on the week prior, it's on a D tier. Again, 24 keys ain't no joke, right? So if you play like mid tier to high, I would say 15, 16, 17s, 18s, you'll be absolutely fine with a Feral Druid, no problemo. Okay, now let's check out the Frost Death Knight, which I think has retained its position pretty solid.
It's been pretty consistent. It's doing a little bit better than Feral and enhancement, but not quite to the levels of Arms and Assassination, so it's about C tier.
Oh yeah.
DK right now, I don't particularly like. I've played both Frost and Unholy at a lower level. I seem to be doing just fine to get my my KSM and things like that.
Oh yeah.
In hierarchies, obviously you might fall a little bit into a weird niche, because at least Frost DK kind of requires a specific pull timer. The tank has to pull around your Breathless Intragosa, otherwise it's very hard for anybody to justify your position, but if the tank does pull around your Breathless Intragosa, then you can clear like 24, 25, stuff like that. It's not that bad. And it does bring its DK utilities. You have that battle res, you have those immunes to all kinds of effects, which is pretty good. So I still feel like Frost is still decent.
Oh yeah,
it's just outshined a little bit too much right now.
Yeah, C tier is definitely playable, and there's no questions asked. You can definitely bring a Frosty kit to your party, and apart from like doing like great damage, it also has lots of utilities, especially if there's other melees that have problems with movement and stuff. It can slow, it can pull, it can really great to have one in the team. Yeah. Okay, now let's move to the Fury Warrior, who has risen, and we were kind of speculating on this.
Clearly, it's higher than Arms, because we've hinted at it, but it's not S tier yet.
No.
However, it was surprising to see Fury doing a little bit well. I mean, maybe it wasn't that surprising.
No, because we talked about it. We kind of expecting like Fury to gain more and more as we get further and further into the expansion.
Yeah, since most raid warriors are essentially Arms, and as people finish getting that Sylvanas cutting edge and transition to M+, if that's what they're doing, at least the top end players are doing that, they'll probably eventually switch to Fury, which is probably why you see more Fury and the high end of things right now in dungeons. And obviously their kind of damage profile and toolkit matched a smidge better in dungeons, at least it comes from a damage perspective, because Arms has better defensive tools than Fury. Arms is like toolkit, but the burst pattern of Arms is just, it matches okay with dungeons. Obviously it's a B tier spec, but Fury just Does it better.
But it can depend really on what affixes and dungeons are going, obviously. But in the overall scheme of things, I think you want more of a spec like Fury, who has, I would say, faster access to being bursty and consistent rather than arms. It's much more fast, it's much more smooth. I personally like it. I like to play arms in raids, and I like to play Fury in dungeons. And it's kind of like, yeah, it's kind of like how both of these specs are positioned. And once again, being smooth and fast is definitely an advantage in high-end keys, because it's all about that timing, you know, getting fast over there. Right. So happy for Fury Warriors, 8 tier, definitely a meta spec in the Mythic Plus department. Now,
hey, happy for Havoc as well.
Yeah,
Havoc
man,
is doing pretty good as well.
It also raised.
Yes, it's in the higher echelons of tiers. It was close to being an S tier spec. It's very high up there with Fury. It does obviously provide a specific benefit to the team that it's using it to clear up pretty high keys.
Oh yeah.
Obviously, the debuff is pretty good because surprise, some of the best DPSers are spellcasters.
What, mage? What? No, Boomkin?
No,
what? Get the fuck out! Get the fuck out!
Havoc essentially is pretty much made for dungeons with its toolkit, with its access to its damage profiles, its high consistent damage, which, you know, if you've watched our Havoc podcast, you know that Havoc kind of suffers a little bit from high burst. Yep. When it comes to high consistent damage, that usually tends to perform pretty well in dungeons as well, at least for the average Joe, which, you know, you're not going to have, if you're an average keeper, you're not going to have a tank that will pull like 5 packs every 2 minutes or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
So for every other situation, Havoc is good. It's a tanky melee DPS specs, one of the tankiest melee DPS specs. It does provide, you know, darkness, which is really good. It has
very useful.
Which is really good.
Very useful.
All of that is pretty good.
And similar to Fury, it kind of shares that smooth and fast-paced playstyle, and, you know, it moves fast, and this is definitely helpful for any team that wants to push, you know, super high keys, and that goes to its advantage as well. So very well deserved A tier. And now moving along to the Outlaw Rogue, who has retained its position, although I do want to say, I'm sure you probably remember that Outlaw used to be the melee king in dungeons for a whole while, but now it's strong A tier.
The thing is, Outlaw is trickier. It's probably A tier because sub is just so much better.
Yeah.
But when looking at the top keys cleared, some of the sub rogues that were really good at the video game also played Outlaw and were clearing kind of similar keys, although Outlaw is just not represented as high, the higher end as sub is. But it obviously has the toolkit made for dungeons.
It is the spec for cleave and AoE, no doubt about it. And once again, this is the thing, right? You mentioned that some of the subs switched to Outlaw stuff. Sub Rogue can do great in specific dungeons and layouts and mob densities, and can do really bad in others. This is where Outlaw tends to gain the traction, because Outlaw is basically great in every dungeon. There's no problem. I think where we see a lot of more subs is actually when you get to like more tricky boss, because boss fights in dungeons, and you need that single target. You need that single target, and especially with tormented affixes, you know, you want those bosses to be killed really fast. Outlaw can deliver single target damage, but is nowhere compared to Subtlety. So this is where the main differences are. I really do believe that because of the affixes, sub has taken the face of Outlaw. But we'll get to sub shortly. Now let's go
Until then, Red
Paladin, baby. Which, man, I was hoping much more for this, but again, we cannot trash it because it's not.
It's hard because I do feel, however much I like Red Paladin and how fun it is, I feel like its toolkit is just not made for dungeons as much as other specs are made for it. I'm sorry, man.
I want a day where this will be here.
That would be very interesting. I would be curious to see that. But it's definitely C tier. It's
C to close B.
The same type of keys as Frost Decay is clearing. I mean, it's no surprise. Red has pretty high burst.
One of the biggest.
It might be easier to play in keys than Frost because you don't need somebody to cater to your cooldowns just as much. Yep. Wings are pretty good, but you do have other tools outside of Wings as well that are essentially working really well for you.
Oh yeah.
And obviously all the utility kit of Red is really good. The off-heals are amazing. The bobs.
Sacrifice freedoms, you know, dispelling poisons and stuff.
That's actually
and
really
diseases.
Good stuff like Plaguefall,
Yeah, it's really good. It has its niches, but it's shining the most. I would just say that as opposed to specs like Fury or Havoc or even the S tiers that we're looking, Red Paladin still suffers from, I would say, a little bit of clunkiness and a little bit slowness to it. It definitely has much more faster access to big damage. So whenever there's a big pack, you can definitely deliver over there. But when there's a lot of movement around and you want that time, you know, to just be there, it cannot handle that, right? So as much as I love Red Paladin, and we both do, and we know how much damage and how much utility it can bring, in terms of like comparing it to everything, it's a deserved C tier for sure. That means you can get your KSM no problem with the Red Paladin. No. Now the Subtlety Rogue for the first
there's a
S tier
glaring hole in our tier list.
And it has to be filled up. So Subtlety, I think we talked about it a little bit on Outlaw. You know, it's my main right now. Subtlety is basically shining in Mythic Plus. I would say definitely the buffs to its AoE, to like Fan of Knives and stuff really made a huge difference for it. You know, Shuriken Tornado is definitely a thing now, you know, having the finality, legendary as well, improves on that, although a lot of people still play with Obedience. Not the point. The point is, it has better AoE damage than it used to have, so it can deliver on that. Granted, not as good as Outlaw, however, its main strong point is still the single target, and it can deliver great on killing down the tormented officers. It can deliver great on, you know, boss fights or whatever, and it brings that rogue utility.
That's actually a very good point that you made, because if you really look at the high-end teams that are running Sub Rogue, pretty much every other member on that team is really good at AoE, and really good at like pretty much any kind of AoE, not just like your super big packs.
Yes, yeah.
So Sub Rogue, I think, fills a niche that usually specs that are good in Mythic Plus don't really fill. So that's probably a major part of why.
And if you look at the MDI teams that basically all of them kind of have like a Sub Rogue over there. If you look like the mob fights, you don't rarely see a Sub Rogue maintaining there. It can open up and have big bursts, but if there's a Boomkin over there and maybe an Elemental or a Frostfire Mage or whatever, it will get outshined. But when you get to the boss fights, when you get to the Tormented Officers, that's when you see Sub Rogue being on top all the time. And this on top of the fact that it adds to that AoE damage for the rest of the specs and also brings that rogue utility. So I would say, about goddamn time, I'm happy. You never saw Sub Rogue, you know, being in MDI. You never saw Sub Rogue in S tier on M+. Fuck everybody else. It's deserved.
Gone. We lost him. It's good.
Yeah, okay.
It's very well deserved considering its history in the last couple of years.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
I'm pretty happy for Sub. And another S tier is our next contender. And no, I'm joking, man. Get the fuck. Put my boy into C tier,
Come on, man. But it's so weird because I've seen you play it. I mean, you're dominating everything, man. It's ridiculous. How can this be?
See, the reason why that is because Survival has very quick access to its burst and has very high upfront burst damage, which is really good. Plus, the spear in the raid makes it really good with every fight that lasts 30 seconds a little bit more.
Oh, yeah.
The Jotun gear from the raid just gives you like 200 to 300 of each secondary stat.
I love how you say that. Jotun gear.
Jotun gear.
Yeah,
I don't know. I cannot pronounce Norse, but that's fine. Okay, so what's the deal with Survival? Because there are very few of us. We're a dying breed, but those of us that are there are like fucking wrecking the meters.
Respect.
The thing is with Survival, a lot of its damage is built up front with the legendary and the bombs, where you just burst stuff really quick. You have Resonating Arrow, which pretty much every respectable Survival is playing Kieran right now, which is on a 1 minute to 40-second cooldown, depending on how many targets you hit with it. And obviously, when you fight AoE, every 40-second having access to a lot of crit damage is really good. And that's partially why Survival is also really good. Everybody and their mom are probably playing Kieran right now, although you do see the occasional Venthyr and Night Fae. I feel like that's the main reason. Obviously, it has Bloodlust, it has Traps, it has Feign Death. You can do certain quirky skips with Survival, which is pretty good. I feel like it's going to lose out in very high packs, and the problem that with him being a melee is a little bit tricky to deal with the constant AoE damage, because to maintain a very high AoE damage output as opposed to other specs on this tier list that will do high damage output, you have to almost individually manage all mobs in a pack, and that's particularly difficult and prone to a lot of mistakes and risks. Plus, Survival is it's probably there with Ret as maybe the squishiest melee in the game. It's incredibly squishy. I do not like it. Turtle is not particularly a great cooldown, And outside of that, you don't yeah, it's a word of glory. Good job, man. And outside of that, you don't really have anything, so you have to be incredibly helpful. Although, I have to say, I wish the encounters would use this a little bit more, that survival is kind of like a mid-range spec. It's not a full range, it's not a full melee. It can do its damage mid-range, not all the time, but it does help with dealing with certain mechanics, which can be good, let's say, if they devised any other types of dungeons in the future. But for now, those dungeons don't really take advantage of what survival can actually do really well.
Well, okay, it's a good points over there, but again, C tier is nothing to sneeze at.
No, now, I'm happy with my survival.
For sure, man. Let's go to the Unholy Death Knight, which I think shares the C tier with the rest of the boys.
It does share the C tier. It's, again, I think it's a problem of Unholy not scaling as well as the other classes. Again, and with the talent setup that it has, I mean, BFA saw Unholy really scale crazy because of Bursting Swords and Fester Might.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Which was fun. Obviously, it was a little bit ridiculous. It was also pretty difficult to pull off, but also, you know, it kept it alive for the entire expansion. Whereas now, I know that there's a conduit that's a little bit bugged that's supposed to be working a little bit better, and it's fine. It's a fun spec. It's also a unique spec in dungeons if you run especially Army of the Damned, because essentially all of your DPS cooldowns are reduced when you spend runic power either on Death Coil or Epidemic or both, and that kind of de-aligns your cooldowns all the time, but it also means that you have access to your cooldowns pretty often and you kind of rotate them on and on and on, and it's a pretty good spec. It's a little bit difficult, but it does have, let's say, a little bit more utility than a survival can bring to a team. You have AMZ, which is so good. You have personal defenses, which are gonna get you out of pretty much all of the shit that you can possibly find yourself in, and it's a good spec. I don't know if it's better or not than Frost. I think it might be a little bit better than Frost DK right now, but they're both clearing kind of the same level of keys, so C tier is pretty much even across the board.
Fair enough. Now, do we introduce this spec?
I did mention that Sub was particularly amazing in high comp teams because it was doing amazing single target, because there are others that do very high AoE damage, and lo and behold,
the spinning crate kick spec.
At this point, I think when I was looking at the top 10, top 20 keys, the top, I think top 5 or something like that is just the same team. Always Windwalker, always Sub, always Windwalker, always Sub. Windwalker is used a little bit more than Sub, so you might not have a Sub, but you'll probably still have a Windwalker. It's the high-end team. The Windwalker damage is stupid.
No, you cannot compete with Bone Dust and Spinning Crate Kick. This you can dance. So this is the trinity that basically propelled Windwalkers, right? Dance of Chi-G, Bone Dust, which is the Necrolord Covenant ability, and Spinning Crate Kick. This is all that you need to know about Windwalker Monks. Now, obviously, Windwalker Monk is no joke to pull off. It's not an easy spec by far. I think it's one of the most, I would say, outrageous, more different specs to play. Like everybody's talking about that ABC, always be casting. Well, with monks, it's a little bit different. Yeah. It's not easy to pull off, and once again, this is another spec that we kind of rooted for and cheered for to be viable, because it took forever for them. Similar to Sub Rogue, this is very interesting. Now that I look at it, both these specs kind of suffered a lot in the majority of the seasons of Mythic Plus.
A BFA. They have actually been consistent at the top of the melee spec since 9.0, maybe halfway through 9.0, maybe at the beginning of 9.0, when people are still discovering stuff now. But even if you look at our, which you probably have it on the screen right now, with our previous melee M+ tier list, the S tier remained the same. And just incredibly good specs. We've been saying on and on how Windwalker is just a really, really good
and fun
melee spec. It just
feels
has
complete.
Has what you need. I'm not sure how much it still struggles with single target right now. It's probably still not better than its AoE, clearly, because that's probably why you have
leagues away
the Sub Rogue, but it does have a place in M+, and it has been kicking ass and taking names.
Yeah, and we're happy for it. So this is the final image. Yeah, this is it.
It's kind of nice to see changes.
Yeah. We were kind of like talking about this things like, man, if we're gonna do another like actual data-based rankings, is how many?
I mean, it did take a little while for things to change a little bit, which is why we've done some other types of tier lists, because because, you know, rehashing the same meta over and over again is a little bit boring. But this is kind of how they are, again, at the very high end of play. This is not how it is for you and me. I personally got my KSM with survival and it was more than enough.
There you go.
And play whatever you like. But if you do want to know, like, if you play perfectly, what would you be able to do with any of the specs? You can kind of expect to have a performance similar to this tier list. But then again, this is just for fun.
Yeah, and you know who else is for fun? Our Patreons, baby. You know, this time I'm gonna stop talking and let Flame talk a little bit about our Patreon.
Listen, we really appreciate you guys supporting us again. And obviously we just had a recent video pretty much talking about all the changes in the channel, and usually with the patrons we usually have this, I say usually too much, in a more confined space, in a personal talk as well, a monthly Patreon talk, which we've omitted this year, but that doesn't mean that we don't appreciate you, and we haven't been putting your efforts into supporting us to good use, and hopefully that can be pretty much
I hope
obvious.
you can see it.
Yeah, these are the times, and we're trying to make the most out of them.
And the most.
And if you're the viewer, like our content and you want to see more, and you want to see more different stuff in the future, check the link down below, check our Patreon page. We have a bunch of goodies there. We've mentioned this at the beginning of the video as well. And maybe there's something for you. Maybe you just want to support us, to see exactly what happens and, you know, see more of what goes on behind the camera.
What happens is we want to thank you for supporting and thank you for watching the video. You have a nice weekend, okay?
Take care.
It's gonna be a great weekend. Marvelous. Stupendous. Incredible weekend.
All right, let's let the people go home, man.
All right, bye-bye.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.